This is Hidden Killers with Tony Brewski.
Bryan Kohberger. It's been a very interesting week watching the evidence continue to come out since Judge Stephen Hippler put that order out saying, we're not going to hide things anymore. We're going to put these things out here in the open. And oh my gosh, things are coming out in the open. And not in the favor of Bryan Kohberger. Joining me to discuss, Robin Dreeke, retired FBI Special Agent, Chief of the Counterintelligence Behavioral Analysis Program. The big bombshells over the last week have been he bought the knife, and he bought the sheath, and he bought the sharpener, and then he allegedly took a selfie, and we'll get to all of that in a second. But when you first heard the news, and we've been speculating on it for quite some time, of if he bought the knife, if we can get the receipt for that, feels like game over. Now that we're here, what do you think?
You know, it's like you and I say all the time. You know, it's these predictable behavior patterns, and the more and more you keep filling in these data points, it just keeps reconfirming all the things we've had conjecture on from the beginning. And I think one of the things that you and I said at the very onset, and we were kind of focused on a little bit, was why does the prosecution seem not to push back so much? Every time defense tries something a little crazy, a little out of line, or just something a little different. And it's because one of our conjecture was they must feel very, very confident with what they do have. And boom, yes. And I think there's going to be more.
I completely agree. We still do not know a lot about his digital footprint. We're learning more and more, and the shopping history certainly one of that. The revelation being he bought the K-bar knife, the same one that was used in this crime, or the same type of one at the very least, same sheath. And I found it interesting too, and I connected some dots on this, the sharpener, which, yeah. Okay, I mean, I guess if you're going to buy a knife, I guess you want a sharpener. That makes sense. But if all of these things that have been claimed are correct in terms of the surviving roommates, we had the statement that came out the other week when those the text messages were revealed and all of that. One of them saying it looked like the guy with the bushy eyebrows, and I'm just paraphrasing, like he had some sort of vacuum type attachment that he was carrying out of the house with him, which again, everybody's like, that, like, was he trying to clean up? If you look at the K-bar knife sharpener, if you don't know what you're looking at and it's dark and somebody's kind of rushing on it, it looks like a vacuum attachment.
Yeah, and it's also interesting about the knife sharpener. So, you know, I'm a former Marine.
Yeah.
I've actually owned K-bars.
Yeah.
And unless you plan on using the knife, you're not going to sharpen a knife. In other words, he's not a collector that was collecting knives. Mm-hmm. And again, when we look at a pattern's behavior, does he own other knives? Has he sharpened other knives? Does he use a knife for anything? So see what I mean? I see. Mm-hmm. So the only reason to sharpen a blade is if you're going to use a blade, and use it for what? So again, I think just a knife sharpener unto itself is another data point that is damning.
It is. I also find it odd that you'd bring the sharpener to the crime. I don't know. I mean, I don't use knives. I mean, other than when I'm cooking. But I sharpen my knives a lot when I'm cooking. So I don't know if you're going to murder people. Do you bring the sharpener? Or is that kind of like you got it sharpened before you get there? Or are you afraid it's going to get dulled down and you got to sharpen it? I mean, it's a weird question.
It's interesting, you know, if you're going to do that reverse, you know, mindset that we do and place ourselves in his position the best we can from a broken brain.
Yeah.
The only thing you can think of, because again, you know, from a pattern behavior, whether it's him or not, because again, not convicted yet, but it's like first time doing something like this, I'm not quite sure. For anyone, you don't know how long a blade will stay sharp. So maybe you're thinking in your mind, I have to bring something along with me. You know, first time, you know, someone, you know, shoots an animal in the wild and they're butchering it, you know, how long does that blade stay sharp? Mm-hmm. So do they bring a knife sharpener with me? I don't know, as I've never hunted like that before. But, you know, so it begs the question, or that begs the question. It illustrates, again, his lack of reps, as we call them, in having done this. Because if it's your first time, you don't have the combination of education and experience, which makes wisdom, as I've said numerous times, to actually do it. It's why everything he does, he seems to have contracted his his behaviors of what he should and shouldn't do to not get caught in a very small box and window. And then outside of that box, he blows it. And that's why he was caught. So because inside that box, he did everything he's supposed to do. But outside that box, like shopping for Amazon for K-bars, buying knife sharpeners, is outside the box. Turning your cell phone off, but only during this period of time. He should have not been using it ever outside of this box. So you see what I mean? He was operating within a very small box that wisdom would have said, hey, we need a larger box to establish a pattern to protect myself from incriminating myself by doing stupid.
There's knowledge and there's wisdom. And they're two different things. Yep. And Kohberger, just with his youth, I guess you could say, he had knowledge. He was a smart guy. He's going for his PhD in criminology. It takes a little work to get there. But yes, but the wisdom is what comes with experience and age and reps. And that's something he obviously did not have. One of those things would be, I guess, buying the murder weapon on Amazon. And I guess completely eluding you that you think no one's going to look back at your shopping history. But I guess if you also think you're not going to get caught, you don't even consider it.
No, and think about this too. So you hit a really key point there that we've said before, and that is his knowledge and his study of doing things like this was vast because he's working on his PhD. But when you're working on a PhD, what are you studying? You're studying past cases. His knowledge was coming from past cases. Past cases he's studying, or anyone that was attempting to do this, again, innocent proven guilty, didn't include current modern technologies and techniques that were used against him. Mm-hmm. In other words, how often did he study in the course of his PhD search histories and buying histories on Amazon? How often was he studying DNA, touch DNA in his studies because it hasn't been used on any of the case studies that he had studied? See what I mean? So his knowledge base was also a bit archaic for today's criminal.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, that's how that system would work.
In other words, if he was trying to fit an MLK or Ted Bundy profile and their behaviors, because that's the type of people he had studied. But our advances in criminology had advanced a lot. Even the cell phone. Mm-hmm. He knew to turn the cell phone off, but he didn't know to turn the cell phone off for months and maybe a year in advance of that, because they're going to go back like that. He knew not to put the trash in his own trash, but put it in the neighbor's trash, but only since you got home. See what I mean? I mean, why the neighbor's trash? So again, this database sets of data was, I think, really limited to those he had studied without a practical application of today's criminology.
Outdated data is basically what he was operating on in his mind. So. And he was putting, if it's him, he was putting a lot of weight on how you would commit a crime in 1995. You might be able to do it that way and get away with it better.
Want more on this case and others? Then press subscribe now and don't miss a moment of true crime coverage from Tony Bruschi and the Hidden Killers podcast.